Hi there, Glocal citizens. Welcome back to another episode of the podcast that inspires a borderless mindset around doing something in the world. I'm your host, Florence Adu, and this week I'm coming to you from New York City, Brooklyn, New York, my other home. And I was able to leave Accra just basically because I had to come back for work. Otherwise, I would have stayed in my lovely, feeling a little safer Africa. And just to give you all a little bit of context, the contrast between New York and Accra is that I think we really have taken seriously the keeping hands sanitized, and masks are a thing that's just going to be contentious. But for the most part, it's law there, so everybody's wearing a mask. And here, I see it quite a bit, not all the time. But the biggest difference is that the hand washing, because we know that if you're going places and touching things, if your hands aren't clean, then there's a serious problem. And in Accra, most places that you go have what we call a Veronica bucket, where you go out, you wash your hands before entering, or hand sanitizer that's outside. Larger establishments are doing temperature checks. So I think there was just a general feeling of more safety. And coming back to New York, there's also a sense of, I get it, because there was mass pandemic. I mean, it hit New York very, very, very hard. And then there was protests, and then there's just recession. So this is just a really interesting time to be in the city that I've grown up to an adult in and loved, and feeling the energy is very different. And I do hope it comes back soon, bigger and brighter and greater and with more love. So I just say everyone needs to just be very patient with everyone that they love, they care about, but not complacent. Let's be diligent about being safe and taking care of our awareness around making sure to manage the pandemic. So with that said, I'm halfway this week in Africa still. My guest is coming to us from Nairobi, Kenya. He's an old friend, and he is the co-director of Synergy Yoga in Nairobi, as well as the founder and director of Capoeira Kibera. He's a father of two, one of which, his daughter, is a model of mine for my dresses, that can be dresses. She's just a beautiful young girl, and she's becoming a beautiful teenager, I think, now. Time just flies. She's on the verge, right? So Salim Rollins, welcome to Glocal Citizens. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm so glad to be on this platform, and good job.
Good.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. So let's get started. Salim, tell us about who you are, where you're from, where you're local, and what is your craft?
Great. So I was born in White Plains, New York, suburbs of the city, grew up in that area. Wonderful household, wonderful, loving, creative, artistic family, and spent a good amount of my life in the West Coast as well. So I consider the Bay Area in California my home. New York will always be home to me as well. I know you from the East Coast, New York area initially. And so, I moved to Nairobi, Kenya 6 years ago. My kid's mom is Nairobian. She's Kenyan. We had decided a while ago that we would want to raise them for most of their youth here in Kenya. So we've been here 6 years. My craft, as you mentioned, I run a yoga school, an international yoga school called Synergy Yoga. I'm sure we'll touch on that. And I'm also a Capoeira Angola instructor. Within that art form, I have the title Contra-Mestre from Mestre Jhon, who's an elder Mestre who's been in New York City actually since 1990. He's 87 years old now. So he's been in the city for years. Yeah, he's amazing. Mm-hmm. He's still there. Nice. So I teach capoeira, I teach yoga, and I do events as well. I do a lot of, I've dealt with music, I've worked in video production, but that's a while ago. So really wellness events, some music events, and mostly wellness events around yoga and capoeira.
Okay. So tell us about, capoeira its roots are in Brazil. So how did you get introduced to capoeira and translated that into something that is a professional endeavor of yours?
Okay, good question. I would say the roots of capoeira are in Angola, and then it kind of blossomed or took form or shape in Brazil. It's a subtle distinction, but it's important to us in traditional capoeira.
Yes.
I got introduced to capoeira in University of California, Santa Cruz. good friend of mine who, Joshua Bialafia, was the first actually to introduce me to capoeira. It's basically kind of, I'd say, the, an art and culture scene at the university, particularly of people of color that I connected with. We were doing theater together for the African American theater troupe, and Josh was directing. He cast me as a lead in this Alice Childress play, and we would have rehearsals at his house every Friday night. The rehearsals would kind of turn into a house party, and there'd be like, people would be on drums and, there'd be just a lot of different interesting things happening and a great group of people. And that's where also the capoeira practitioners, we call capoeiristas, would come. So I would see them getting down like in the kitchen, and I was like, I want to do that. And so after that term was done, I was committed to the play that term. So starting in next term, in January, I committed to starting capoeira. And, that was 1995, and it's been with me ever since, 25 years now.
Okay, wow. So tell us a little bit more about the philosophy and what capoeira actually is.
Okay. To be clear, I practice what we consider the traditional form of the art called Capoeira Angola. We consider it traditional because I think that Capoeira Angola holds a lot of the traditions and ties to kind of African ritual, African ceremony, a certain structure. So it kind of holds, it's known as the holder of kind of spiritual capoeira in a sense. Capoeira is an Afro-Brazilian martial art developed by the enslaved Africans who were brought from Angola and Congo to Brazil. And we say the roots are really in Central Africa because, these enslaved Africans used their martial forms, their music, other practices in the formation of capoeira. So it's a very interesting process of capoeira definitely emerged within the context of slavery, right? But was also based on a sensibility of fighting, of elusiveness, of deception in some ways, which was very well established already in Angola. If you look back to the military leader, Queen Nzinga, and different military leaders even from Angola, they used a lot of the kind of sensibility of capoeira, elusiveness, what we consider guerrilla fighting, for example, is kind of an integral part within the philosophy of capoeira. So elusiveness, not using force to, kind of having a flow to the way in which you move. And integrating dance and music into the art. It's also a very African thing. African martial arts typically have music accompanying them. If you look at Senegalese wrestling, for example, there's like percussion, there's drums. So there's a rhythmic quality to the way that you fight, which comes up in capoeira as well. And then there's the song. You practice, to music, to percussive instruments, and also to call and response songs, which are, for us, hold the history of the art. It's kind of our, because so many records were destroyed in Brazil, but in a lot of ways we've kept the history of the transatlantic slave trade, of capoeira, of old masters, a lot of different stories. In the same ways that a griot would. We have that in capoeira through the songs we sing.
So ultimately, like thinking back to warfare in the African context, it was a lot more cunning versus violence until it was violent, right? So I'm getting that there was a ritual with battle that was more symbolic. And there was, like, we talk about the gentleman's war, whereas, our Western influencers were obviously a little bit more about implements, whereas we were more about the psychological aspects of dominating our enemies until we weren't. So in the first phase, it's this ritual that first establishes dominance. And then if that doesn't hold, then it progressed. Is that kind of the idea or understanding of the place?
I think that's an interesting way to put it. And I would also say the element of, particularly for Capoeira Angola, the ancestral connection is there. In a lot of martial arts, particularly in West Africa, you kind of go to the shrine, or you go kind of, go to the source before you, even if it's kind of friendly, competitive. Like there's a great book about this on Senegalese wrestling specifically. And they have to go out to the bush and go to like the family shrines before they go into the big fight. So there's that kind of preparation. Certain things like this carry over in capoeira as well. Now, how it's practiced today, things have changed so much over the centuries. But again, in the traditional form of capoeira, having an understanding, some level of understanding of these components is really important, because that's in a lot of ways the link. For example, the instrument we play as an instrument that, more than making music, And more than creating an ambiance or feeling, also is a way to connect ancestrally.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the foundation of how, before you even move or before you compete, the music kind of coming first and channeling all of that energy is really fundamental and very African kind of way to go about holding ritual and even having a martial art practice.
Right. More evidence that we were first. You look at really, I mean, you think about like the Civil War, think about the Civil War and what have you, and they had the trumpeters that, would usher them in and what have you.
Right.
We had our drummers. We had the beats going from the roots, so to speak. Right. So interesting. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Very lovely. So that's how you came to the capoeira side of things. Let's take a pivot a little bit. So I asked this question, why the where? And you've indicated a bit of why the where, but I want to get, particularly in the context of the world we're living in now, and you being a Black American living in Africa, tell me more about why the where. Tell me more of your motivations, more of your insights, more of how Kenya and Nairobi became home for you.
I fell in love with the Somali Kenyan woman.
That's easy. It's very simple.
I always had the vision and idea of living on the continent, so it worked out conveniently, or so we can say that it's destiny or fate. Even my mom naming me Salim, and I end up in a Somali community, when I do, get married, is also interesting. It kind of made certain things.
Right. So tell us, Salim means?
Peace is a simple kind of reduction, but peace, intactness, wholeness. There are a lot of different interpretations or way to use that name. So, but all of those, wellness. So it's very connected to kind of the work that I do as well. Yoga and Capoeira.
Sure.
I fell in love with and married a Somali Kenyan woman. We had 2 children. We met in Brooklyn and spent a bit of time in Nairobi in 2008. We thought we were going to stay at that time. We conceived our first child, our daughter Aza. And we decided not to stay for multiple reasons. Fatima she didn't have U.S. citizenship. And then there were some things about having our children born outside of the U.S. in terms of immigration and how that worked. And you see how all of this stuff gets twisted in terms of politics, like who has a right to do certain things politically, or how Trump at one point was really challenging Obama. It wasn't important because technically you're not supposed to run for certain positions in higher office if you're born outside of the U.S. and it's not on like a military base. So there were certain things that informed our decision to move back to the U.S. So we moved to Oakland at that point. Yeah, and we spent 5 years there. It was great. And then there came a point where actually Fatima said, okay, I'm ready to go home. And it was kind of like that. It was kind of abrupt. I was like, wait, okay. I've got something to do now in Oakland. I have a capoeira group and an amazing job. And so I had to like work through the little mind talk that was like, it's not time yet, and realize, no, it actually is a great time to transition back to the continent. And there's so much family support for our kids and for us in Kenya. I mean, to me, some of the big advantages as a father, I would say, is actually being in an African country, in an African country where my kids' teachers are Black, where they don't need to experience life going through this racialized lens and experience that really, creates all of these, kind of what I think these fabricated differences, between people. They exist here, certainly, but there's a lot of reinforcement of who they are as people and as Black youth. It's not like an exception to the rule that you have a Black president. That's how it's going to be, or that your teacher or whomever. So I felt like on a psychological level, they're not that my kids would have so many advantages growing up here in terms of seeing themselves as the rule, seeing themselves as the standard, as instead of kind of having to do all the work that a lot of us have had to do to kind of unlearn, some of the conditioning, a lot of the hundreds of years of conditioning as people of color and as Black people in the U.S. So to me, giving them the opportunity to kind of have just a different worldview, and to really kind of be seated in a place where they saw themselves reflected like everywhere was a huge advantage. And that's true for me too. Just my experience, not having to constantly fight this thing or have this weight that's there in the U.S. around being in such a racialized and we see how tensions have been erupting recently, and they always have been. So I think that had a lot to do with it.
Okay. So do you actually recognize that difference in your children? Like that do they see themselves as African children? Do they see themselves as American children there? Just how has that transition been for your children?
Definitely both, which is actually, to me, the ideal scenario, is not to negate that they're also American as well.
Yes.
Right? So they have two passports, which again is a huge advantage. It's very easy, it's surprisingly easy for them to get a Kenyan passport here, actually. So that process was, in spite of the other numerous challenges I've personally had with immigration in Kenya, that piece was very easy, fortunately. That's great, because that, to me, again, sets them up. I mean, I love that they have the opportunity, if they want to do business, if they want to work, if they want to own property, if they want to live in Kenya, that's just given. That's a given. They don't need to do anything. Likewise in the US, and I think they'll probably do both in their life. So I think they identify as American and Kenyan. We go back to the US in non-COVID time. In the last few years, we've gone back every summer. So July, August, we're typically in the US to see my parents, their grandparents, and I have work that I do in the summertime. So I made a point to keep that connection as well, not just with the US, but with the family. On a regular basis. My mom came here in February, spent a month, which was amazing. So when they go back, they really kind of, we keep them engaged in really amazing programs in the summer. Destiny Art Center in Oakland, where I used to work, they do dance theater and martial arts with an integrated violence prevention program. This is a youth arts organization. So they do that in the summers typically. They love it. And they get, they still get kind of the culture, the music. The way people speak, the conversations that are happening, they're different, especially in the Bay. A lot of different. So to me, it's great that they kind of get exposed to some of that, but they're not inundated with the information all the time. I think sometimes my opinion is that youth in the US, depending where you live and what community you're in, sometimes there's so much information. And sometimes we expect them to really to have to articulate, if it's gender pronouns, if it's this, that, and the other, and having to really suss out things that, in my opinion, it's like, does a 9-year-old really need to have that much information, or really try and sort out certain things around if it's sexual identity, or just the media that comes in is so heavy and so persistent and is so clever at kind of catching youth's attention and shifting how they think. So this kind of, want culture in the US to me is a product of capitalism in a lot of ways, the kind of capitalism that's practiced in the US. And so that, I noticed that when I go back, and because I teach kids a lot. And so I noticed that, and I feel like here in Nairobi, it's just much more, there's a bit more space for them to kind of grow into being adults, to not being inundated with targeted marketing. I mean, it's there, it's here, but it's much less than in the US.
Right. No, I definitely recognize that. Yeah, it's a very, very different experience. So last question about your children. Do they speak any local language?
Not really well. I think we fell short in that area. I think that probably, once you get into parenting, it's just it's kind of go. And I think that, their mom speaks, I speak Portuguese, their mom does speak Swahili and Somali. She's Kenyan Somali, some Italian and English. I mean, this is pretty typical in Kenya. I'd say most Kenyans are trilingual. They'll speak their own ethnic languages. There are 42 ethnic groups in Kenya. They'll speak Swahili, which is kind of, spoken by all the ethnic groups, and English. Most Kenyans, have, are trilingual to some extent. Depending on the education, it might be less English, or less of their ethnic language. But a lot are. That's pretty common. So in school, they have Kiswahili and they have French. They go to a Waldorf school in Nairobi.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Interesting.
And so they have kind of phrases, and they can communicate some things, but they are not flowing in Kiswahili. That's something we need to work on.
Yet. Yeah, they're not flowing yet.
Great. Yes, correct.
Right. So this is great segue into my Glocal Speak question. So in my Glocal Speak question, I ask, we want to hear what you hear. So I ask my guests to share a word, phrase, or saying that is a meaningful part of your local experience, and why or how you came to value it as Glocal Speak.
That's right. You did mention this one. So now I got to think of, well, okay, good. I'd say one of the most common expressions here is sawa, sawa,
Okay.
which basically means it's cool. Everything's cool. Everything's all right. I think it's important here because I find, and I've spent time in West Africa, one of the things I appreciate about East Africa and Kenya is there's a certain softness to the way people move. The analogy I make is that I feel like West Africa is has a more masculine energy, and I think East Africa has a more feminine, or West Africa is more fire. When you think of the music, for example, the percussion, just like, it's driving all the time. The climate's even, and the people, it's a bit faster. People are East Africa is like very pole, like slow, So the
interesting. Okay.
The sawa kind of like mentality or feeling is like, no, it's, and you find this in, granted, most African countries, but it's kind of even more so when you come to Kenya. Like you'll feel like people are really slow, like not mentally slow, but like they're moving slow through the world, which by reference is probably true. And, it's sort of one of the things, and again, I know you've been through this, part of the kind of mental and emotional adjustment and transition of like kind of starting to get in the flow of the culture here is learning how to slow down,
Yes.
Just learning how to, and I know, again, Ghana definitely as well, anywhere on the continent for the most part, which is great, because I feel like we really get into this, this hurried kind of mindset, which brings on so much stress and is like, it's kind of, we're oriented around productivity in the West and in the US so much. Getting things done, or completing or on to the next thing, not just kind of being, I think that people are comfortable. They're more comfortable just being here. You're not expected to always be doing, going. So pole is another one that I like. Slow, take your time. There's no rush.
Okay, so sawa,
and pole.
Pole. Okay.
And just like in Ghana, like when you say something twice, oftentimes it's
yes,
emphasis,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. So we have some Glocal speak from Kenya. Yeah. All right, so let's now dive into you as a yogi.
Okay.
Because I feel like that's something that has basically evolved as you've lived in Kenya.
It has evolved, definitely. I started yoga practice 20 years ago. Capoeira kind of brought me to yoga. It was a way to manage injuries that I had from training Capoeira, and became definitely a lifestyle. As soon as I started going to yoga class, I started doing home practice, which for me was important. It was like, okay, I don't need to go to a studio, and so
I feel the same. I'm with you. Exactly, yeah.
Which is kind of the purpose, is to have this medicine that you can take wherever you go. You're not relying on a studio or someone else for that to take care of yourself. And so I've, over the years, I've taught yoga in different spaces. I've taught in juvenile justice centers. I've taught in public schools in New York. I've taught in California. And I started, since we moved here in 2014, I definitely started teaching more adult classes. And a couple of years ago, got back in touch with a good friend of mine who I've known for 20 years. And he's the founder of Synergy Yoga. He's done phenomenal work with yoga, and also he does Thai massage certifications as well. And so we've been privy to each other's work, both in the yoga kind of spaces and outside of, and within Capoeira and other projects. So our relationship we reconnected, got back in touch, and started to collaborate. And that collaboration has just really, I'd say, blossomed over the last year and a half. Francisco Morales Bermudez is his name. He came to Nairobi in December to do a Thai massage certification. Really amazing. We were able to bring some youth out from the slum to some of the young men that I work with teaching capoeira in the Kibera slum. Came and took the certification free of charge, and just really this is the work we want to be doing. This is our vision: is to create opportunities for people, keep offering wellness experiences and platforms. So we basically, when COVID came, because of course, there's no in-person, classes happening, and a lot of Synergy's work is training. So we do yoga teacher trainings, we do retreats, as I mentioned, massage certifications. So everything kind of had to get re-strategized, and we and we moved online. And so now we have a full online platform where we have teachers from Peru, US, and Kenya teaching on the platform, about 14 classes a week. And we have a Sunday Sangha, which is a free community gathering. It's one of my favorite events that we do. And different presenters each Sunday. It's 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And there have been people, there's Tumu is the kind of cultural queen of Hawaii. She's one of the elders there who holds the language and the hula and is really a holder of the culture in Hawaii. She's been on. My dad, who's a diversity consultant for the last 50 years, civil rights movement, and an author, came on. We had Acharya was on last Sunday. He's a monk, Buddhist monk, and talked about the concepts of metta and karuna, like selfless care and love. So it's been a really diverse range of presenters. And then we've had a couple presenters on yoga philosophy. But what's great is we've been able to engage a lot of people of color, primarily people of color, on this platform, and which is important for both of us, myself and Francisco, in terms of creating different spaces in which we can share, and also, creating spaces for healers who are people of color as well, and Black folks. And it's been really beautiful. So that's like a weekly ritual that we have at Synergy that's really amazing. And then we've done a retreat. It's called Rising. And that was basically a 2-day wellness retreat, actually 3-day wellness retreat. Again, different presenters, a lot of young healers, when I say young, 30s, 40s. And then we had a circle of elders as well. It was one of the kind of important workshops that we offered. So different elders came together and we gave them some prompts, and we were able to kind of facilitate a conversation, kind of creating a space similar to the function that elders have always played in different societies of giving counsel and sharing information. So that happened, and we have another Rising Festival happening end of September. So that's been an ongoing piece. And then we're kind of planning out for our in-person retreats and trainings over the course of the next 6 months. So that's starting to happen in October.
Okay. So you'll start with new retreats in October, or you'll start planning in October?
We have a retreat we're planning now. Yeah, it's like I'd say the next 8 months are planned out for events. But we have a retreat in October in Lamu, Kenya. Lamu is the first Swahili settlement on the coast of Africa. It's one of the most beautiful places I've been. There are no cars. It's island. Lamu is an island, and there are no cars in Lamu. And people use these dhow boats, these beautiful old dhow boats. The architecture and design in Lamu is phenomenal. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. So I'll be doing a retreat with a Synergy collaborator who's a musician and a yogi by the name of Jhon. She's a good friend, and so we're doing a retreat together. Francisco then we're planning one for Jamaica as well with her end of December. And so Francisco had a Peru retreat set up for November. That's been pushed recently to March. So we definitely have had to, shift things around and of course go with kind of what the local laws are around travel and what policies are, and also where people are with their finances in terms of
Right, of course. So just to go back to beyond just the wonderful events you're having, and listeners, I'll have very rich show notes for this. We're going to talk about the Sunday Sangha, the Rising Festival. So I'll get all that information and you'll have that. So when you can meet Salim and all of his collaborators. But I wanted to understand before COVID, how yoga, like the role that yoga plays in Nairobi, because so in Ghana, we have a small but growing yoga community. And I think we have a yoga in our minds and in our bodies. Like we do it automatically. I think most humans do some yoga automatically. But in terms of organizing and attracting and marketing the studio and running the business, how was that from the brick and mortar perspective prior to last spring?
So I would say Nairobi has the advantage or the fortune from a yoga teacher standpoint of having had a fairly large nonprofit called Africa Yoga Project based in Nairobi. And so the work that they've done is to train Nairobians, train Kenyans through yoga teacher trainings. So to give them a certification, to create employment opportunities for them. And there are a bunch of other programs they run. So Africa Yoga Project's based in Nairobi. Nairobi is the hub of East Africa. So for example, the UN headquarters is based in Africa. is based in Nairobi. In most US and European nonprofits who are doing work in East Africa, might be working in Somalia or South Sudan, are based in Nairobi. So all that's to say that there's a large international community in Nairobi, specifically from the US and Europe, and the Middle East as well. Middle East is very close. And so, with, of course, these expats comes a kind of need for services like yoga. So in some ways, Nairobi has always been well positioned to receive yoga. Now, I came to Nairobi for the first time in 2008, and I was one of a few, maybe 5 yoga teachers in the city, or very few. Also, yoga culture wasn't really, Africa Yoga Project wasn't here. There was, the city wasn't as developed as it is now. And I think yoga was a bit in like, I'd say that, in most Kenyans' mind was still uncertain or taboo against kind of religious beliefs, which I know you've encountered in Ghana. There was, and I can see that in my own family. Like my mother-in-law, for example, was like, she wasn't into it. And now she's like, she is, and she like juices every morning. And a lot of the things that we were bringing back then in 2008 in terms of health and approaches to wellness and health and taking care of yourself are things that she's implementing now. And I think that's reflective of the experience of a lot of Kenyans who've had some level of exposure to someone around them who practice. If you haven't, then it's still going to be, you might be still working off of kind of myth or what what your perception of the practice is, or the idea that it might conflict with religion, something like that. But yoga's really shifted. So I'd say it's very active in Nairobi in general. We probably have, at this point, I would guess about 6 or 7 dedicated, good 7 dedicated yoga studios. And I don't think there was one when I first came.
Okay.
Yeah.
So within a decade, the industry and the environment has definitely welcomed and opened its arms around it.
It is. The Lamu Yoga Festival has been huge. I teach at that festival every year for the last 4 years. They attract almost 400 people.
Okay.
To Lamu. Lamu is a very small place, but it's a great boost for the local economy there. And that's a great event on the coast. That's been huge. And there've also been yoga teacher trainings now that have happened in Kenya over the last probably 3 years. Well,
okay.
The yoga project's been doing it, but outside of, they specifically train Kenyans. That's their home mission. So that's not like necessarily open for everyone. And now there've been teacher trainings that people are coming internationally to Kenya, usually held on the coast because it's much warmer than Nairobi, and and you're on the coast. Like, who's not going to work on the coast?
Right. Everyone loves a beach. Yeah. Okay. Very interesting. So tell us more about, so you told us kind of how you're pivoting and moving into just some of the virtual activities, and then also with the festivals and events. I want to take another step back and talk a little bit more about working in Kibera.
Sure.
So tell us, for our listeners who don't know about Kibera, can you give us some context about that area and how you were able to get in and be effective with your program?
Sure. So Kibera is considered the largest slum in Africa. I don't know if that's true, but it's certainly one of them. It's one of maybe 2. So it's a huge population. Some estimates say around 1 million people live in Kibera, but it's hard to get an accurate census, I think. But my people on the ground there who are from there and point to about 1 million people. So I think it's around that number. And it's a so-called slum community. So economically, financially impoverished community, and yet, like a lot of communities, very vibrant in a lot of ways. If you go, because I teach in Kibera a couple times a week, and if you go there at night, like, where it's kind of like, I'm here in this in the uptown part of Nairobi, basically, and it's like, you're in your gated community, or at least in my case, a gated compound. But in Kibera, there's much more street life, and there's like music, and there's women grilling fish out on the roadside at night, and there's activity, and there's interaction. So that's one of the things I love about Kibera in general, is that, like, people are there's more of a communal feeling to the culture there. It's not like you have to leave your, compound to engage with people, So it's a pretty amazing place. A lot of creatives have come out of Kibera in Kenya, a lot of artists, a lot of musicians. So that's also, I think, the case in a lot of places as well, that kind of the struggle breeds resourcefulness, right, and creativity in a lot of ways. And so I was connected with the people that I work with in Kibera through a friend in the Capoeira community who's from Chicago. And he was out here doing some nonprofit work, working with a youth arts organization called Kibera Social Arts. Kibera Social Arts' flagship program is called Slum Dance Africa. And the founder, Victor Onyango, is a dancer. He's a break dancer who started Slum Dance Africa following the 2007 post-election violence.
I remember that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so they're an amazing resource for youth in Kibera to have space, have a safe space. They do more than dance, not just dance, but that's the primary focus of there. They've done different programs. We're now working on doing some programs with girls, with teen girls, kind of support group for them. But anyway, so this friend of mine from Chicago connected me with Victor, who's from Kibera and started Slum Dance Africa. And he's like, you have to come train capoeira with this guy. So they did. They started coming to my house where I was teaching class at the time. And after a while they were like, just come to Kibera. And I was like, all right. I started going to Kibera and just teaching there, just volunteering. After about maybe a little less than a year of volunteering, I was able to secure a grant through a small family foundation in the US. And then we were able to kind of run some different kinds of programs. So I was able to start to give more professional development to Slum Dance Africa. And also we started a kind of teach the teacher model or program where they were, I'd say 3 or 4 of my older students were starting to go into public schools and in Kibera, in the Kibera area, and teach. So I would train them and they would go kind of teach directly. And the idea was to also be training them up, giving them professional development in teaching artistry, which is something I have a background in nonprofit management. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we've kind of been running the program like that, like basically free classes for kids in the community, professional development for Slum Dance Africa, and then having some of the teachers start to teach in local schools as well.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Sounds like fun.
It is.
Sounds like your all of your work sounds like fun.
That's the idea, right? Like,
yeah.
That's what we're supposed to be doing.
Right. If only we could all approach all of our, I mean, my work is primarily fun, but yes, if we could all do that, we'd all be a lot more sunny. Yeah. So this is a great, again, another great segue into my next segment, which is my mindset hack. So this is when I ask you, what is your favorite or an innovative mindset hack? So this is one that you can imagine or one that you know of, one that you practice.
Okay, that's good. So just a mindset that helps keep me centered or that I carry through my worldview, basically.
Yes.
Something that's been coming up recently and with colleagues in conversation has been, and I think this is really important, to start to get out of the struggle mentality. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Really, that's a good one.
Identifying it within yourself. I have to struggle, or even grinding. Some of these terms it's creating these constant mental struggles for us. Of course, that's not to say that there's not hardship in the world, but from a yogic perspective, for example, it's not a question of like what's kind of what you encounter in the world. It's a question of how you respond to it, right?
Yes.
So I think that's been really important is transitioning out of like struggle mentality and really, owning abundance, acknowledging what's already there. Again, we were talking about what I would describe as a kind of entrapment of capitalism, where you're always reaching for something else, never satisfied. You always need the next thing, or you need more money, or you need a raise, or you need that other position. So you're constantly disconnected from where you are. You're constantly in the future, which is never where you are. You're never in the future. So
sure.
So, and of course, there's a balance between, and that doesn't say don't strive or don't have ambition. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that this mindset, which can be very toxic, of like, accumulating, always needing more, that's one of the things I love about being here is that, I know a lot of people who have so much less, and it's like, they're not, they have concerns, they have needs. Some folks, have real struggles, but they're not creating extra struggles around it, like they're keeping a mindset that's like, okay, well, it's fine. It's going to be okay. Okay,
yeah.
Hardships, and we'll figure out how to deal with them, but I'm not going to have a nervous breakdown, Right. If I don't have money right now, I'll find someone in my community who does. People lend money more easily here. It's more fluid. They're less concerned It's like if you have, you give a little bit, and then someone will give it back to you.
Yeah.
And there's a bit more trust with that. I've lent money to a friend of mine now in Kibera, and it's fine. And I know I've done it before. He pays me back right when he says. It's not an issue. And if he didn't, and I didn't need it, then I wouldn't worry anyway. So it's a bit of a tangent, but I think this mentality, so kind of the struggle mentality, like, really shedding that has been important. And I'll stick with that.
Yeah, I love it. That's a great one. That's a really great one. It really resonates. And I think not only in the context of like Africa, and I love the analogy you made with, if I can give someone something, and the idea that if I give it to them, if they don't pay it, I'm not going to stress over it. Like there's just no struggle. Like everything is easy.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's as easy as we make it.
That's a good point. And we had someone, we literally had, so Janine, who I mentioned to you, who's a colleague in the yoga work, did a workshop for us called Life is Easy. And kind of went through cultivating this mindset of things are going to be easy, and to see the ease in life instead of the struggle. It's kind of like we experience what we focus on, right?
Exactly.
Focus on the struggle, or, even when it comes down to, and this is work I'm still doing, like, my people. It's like, okay, but that also keeps us in, struggle mentality, like the struggle that we've been through historically. That doesn't mean that there hasn't been a struggle, of course, but when do we evolve out of that mindset? Because that all puts you, it's like giving your power away,
right. That's it. That's exactly it. Exactly. Yeah. So let's be empowered. I love it. So Salim, we're getting to the end of our conversation. This has been so enlightening. I always love my conversations with you, but this is getting into catching up on Nairobi life. I hope I can make it there. That's one of the countries that was on my list for this year, but it's not anymore.
Kenya's kind of a sleeper, like a lot in the sense that like people come here typically for safari oftentimes, like they're here for kind of the natural environment, like a lot of the tourism, but there's so much, I think a lot of people love the climate in Nairobi, which is not an obvious thing that you think about, but I say people, particularly people in the West, because it's very moderate. We're high altitude in Nairobi. We're not on the coast. So it would be more like a warm Bay Area, maybe in the U.S. is how the analogy I make. It's subtropical, so like the fauna and everything, it's still that you understand you're in the tropics and the animals. But it's really and the people are so pleasant, and then it's such a diverse country, even in terms of the kind of spaces you can go to, from safari in the mountains. You can go from mountains to the coast, to a desert is in Kenya, all sorts of different spaces. It's really beautiful, beautiful country.
Right. And I guess what is also one can appreciate is that the infrastructure is fairly well put together.
Difference. Oh, it's good. I mean, I have better Wi-Fi often than like my colleagues in the US. It's like their Wi-Fi that's cutting out when we're meeting.
Wow.
I know.
Yeah.
So small details, but again, like I said, UN headquarters is in Nairobi, and with all the humanitarian and development NGOs that are based here, like there's a reason that it should be developed, or that it is developed anyway.
Yeah. So it's definitely on my list.
Good.
So
come visit.
Before too long, you'll see me there.
Good.
Well, let me take a step, and let me actually just kind of get a little bit of on a different kind of probe. I always like to find out what inspires you in a content space. So you're a music person. So what are you listening to these days?
I have like all these Spotify playlists.
Oh, okay.
Okay, let's say in terms of contemporary artists, like, and it's funny because sometimes, like, my kids in a lot of ways inform what I listen to, because in the sense that I might want to school them on old school artists, artists, if it's Bill Withers or Stevie Wonder or Nina Simone. So there's that, or Fela Kuti. They can, my son can recite multiple Fela songs. So I'm always...
Good job, Dad.
Thumbs up, right?
Good job, Dad.
Exactly, I'm doing my work.
Yeah.
Contemporary artists, I like Tank and the Bangas is up there for me. I love them.
Okay, yeah, I love them too.
Great.
Yeah,
I know,
great.
amazing. I really want to see them live.
Yeah.
Tierra Whack in the hip hop space, I like a lot. Gregory Porter in kind of the jazz genre.
Yeah.
You're in Brooklyn, Florence?
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't know if he's in Brooklyn now, but I know he's lived there for years. Who else am I listening? Yeah, I mean, so it fluctuates between. I still listen to a lot of old school, and if I go through hip hop, it'll be a lot of our generation, native tongues, and into more contemporary Black Star. If it's soul music, it will be a lot more classics in that genre. Blues.
Sure.
When it started, I was listening to a lot of blues. I was listening to a lot of Muddy Waters and Williamson and. Yeah, like classic blues artists. Somehow it was like hitting the right chord for me.
Yeah. It's so funny because I feel like we have to somehow figure out how to preserve the blues because it's not transcending.
You're right.
Yeah, that one is not transcending. Like jazz seems like it will always transcend with the but yeah, the blues is part of it might be that it's struggle music. So really want to evolve that.
I love that. I'm on the note of struggle. I love like using art and creativity to express the struggle. I mean, that to me is a very that's the way to do it. It's not
exactly leave it there.
Yeah, cry. You let it cry. When you're playing blues, you're crying. So it's beautiful to that. Being able to just cry out your music. To me, some of the best artists, just speaking on music, are artists who kind of have that. Have that vulnerability and openness where they could just be crying, but they're making music. So
Sure. Wow, you gave us some gems here. So again, rich show notes this week. Make sure you take a look. A lot of resources. So as I said, I know it's evening time there. You probably have some things to move on to. Over here, I got to get my morning started. So, right. So, what are some last words for now? What would you like to share with our audience as a parting gift?
Yeah, I think I would say, like at this point in time, in the midst of COVID, one of the things there are multiple things that I'm with staying on this mantra of releasing the struggle. That I'm finding are very beautiful, and that I'm finding are kind of medicine for me personally and for humanity, And I was talking to someone about this yesterday and saying how, I personally think that in a lot of ways, this COVID is like the medicine that humanity needs, and medicine doesn't always taste good, right?
Yeah, that's a bit profound. Yeah.
Yeah, the fact that people are, having to be a bit more quiet. It's kind of a hibernation period, the way I see it. Everyone's kind of going inside, and a lot of people are like figuring out what's really important to them in life right now. Like a lot of people are going through that process because we have one reason being that we have a bit more space and time to do it. Like what else are we going to do if we have to be home? Let's think. Put thought into, how we move through the world, what our impact is. What our, as both as individuals and as humans. So I think in some ways this is the medicine that we need. And I think also it's really beautiful. We maybe wouldn't be having this conversation if COVID hadn't come. There are a lot of conversations that we're having now if it didn't come as well. That's kind of another byproduct. Public conversations and smaller spaces where we're coming together in communities. Like I said, our Sunday Sangha. And I think a lot of people are connecting with different communities online that they probably wouldn't be connected with otherwise, Right. So I think that's, a lot of these things are things to kind of think about and look at, like what are the positive things? What are some of the beneficial things that could or are coming out of this time, this period that we're in?
Nice. I like that. Very, very well said. Last thought. Before we go, Salim, I wanted to get the location. Do you have your Sunday Sanghas in a library on your Synergy website or on?
Yeah, they're all free. They're all free.
Okay.
So
great.
It's synergy.yoga, not
.com.
So synergy.yoga. The Sunday Sangha is listed under online classes. So you'll just scroll to the Sunday classes and then just click on the little green video and you'll be led in right to the Sangha. And then as for other classes, we charge $25 for a week of classes and $85 for a month. And then there's a host of different things that are happening. We're doing online Thai massage certification right now. And there are a bunch of other programs, special programs that we have calendared in for the next several months.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Well, Glocal citizens, we've brought you another gem. I want to say thank you again to my guest, Salim Rollins.
Thank you.
And as always, you can find us at glocalcitizenspod.com. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. We're just getting on Podbean if you're a Podbean person, but pretty much everywhere you find podcasts. So don't forget to subscribe, share, listen, comment, and make recommendations. That's how we have wonderful guests like our guest today. So until next time, bye for now.